Good morning. Thank you for joining me today. This morning we'll be in Numbers chapter 16, verse 41, through chapter 18, verse 32. But on the next day, the whole community of Israelites murmured against Moses and Aaron, saying, "You have killed the Lord's people." When the community assembled against Moses and Aaron, they turned toward the tent of meeting, and the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord appeared. Then Moses and Aaron stood before the tent of meeting. The Lord spoke to Moses, "Get away from this community so that I can consume them in an instant." But they threw themselves down with their faces to the ground. Then Moses said to Aaron, "Take the censer, put burning coals from the altar in it, place incense on it, and go quickly into the assembly and make atonement for them, for wrath has gone out from the Lord. The plague has begun." So Aaron did as Moses commanded and ran into the middle of the assembly, where the plague was just beginning among the people. So he placed incense on the coals and made atonement for the people. He stood between the dead and the living, and the plague was stopped. Now 14,700 people died in the plague, in addition to those who died in the event with Korah. Then Aaron returned to Moses at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and the plague was stopped. The Lord spoke to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and receive from them a staff from each tribe, one from every tribal leader, 12 staffs. You must write each man's name on his staff. You must write Aaron's name on the staff of Levi, for one staff is for the head of every tribe. You must place them in the tent of meeting before the ark of the covenant where I meet with you. And the staff of the man whom I choose will blossom. So I will rid myself of the complaints of the Israelites which they murmur against you." So Moses spoke to the Israelites, and each of the leaders gave him a staff, one for each leader according to their tribes, 12 staffs. The staff of Aaron was among their staffs. Then Moses placed the staffs before the Lord in the tent of the testimony. On the next day Moses went into the tent of the testimony, and the staff of Aaron, for the house of Levi, had sprouted, and brought forth buds, and produced blossoms, and yielded almonds. So Moses brought out all the staffs from before the Lord to all the Israelites. They looked at them, and each man took a staff. The Lord said to Moses, "Bring Aaron's staff back before the testimony to be preserved for a sign to the rebels, so that you may bring their murmurings to an end before me, that they will not die." So Moses did as the Lord commanded him. This is what he did. The Israelites said to Moses, "We are bound to die. We perish. We all perish. Anyone who even comes close to the tabernacle of the Lord will die. Are we all to die?" The Lord said to Aaron, "You and your sons and your tribe with you must bear the iniquity of the sanctuary, and you and your sons with you must bear the iniquity of your priesthood. Bring with you your brothers, the tribe of Levi, the tribe of your father, so that they may join with you and minister to you while you and your sons with you are before the tent of the testimony. They must be responsible to care for you and to care for the entire tabernacle. However, they must not come near the furnishings of the sanctuary and the altar, or both they and you will die. They must join with you, and they will be responsible for the care of the tent of meeting, for all the service of the tent, but no unauthorized person may approach you. You will be responsible for the care of the sanctuary and the care of the altar, so that there will be no more wrath on the Israelites. I myself have chosen your brothers, the Levites, from among the Israelites. They are given to you as a gift from the Lord, to perform the duties of the tent of meeting. But you and your sons with you are responsible for your priestly duties, for everything at the altar and within the curtain. And you must serve. I give you the priesthood as a gift for service, but the unauthorized person who approaches must be put to death." The Lord spoke to Aaron, "See, I have given you the responsibility for my raised offerings. I have given all the holy things of the Israelites to you as your priestly portion, and to your sons as a perpetual ordinance. Of all the most holy offerings reserved from the fire, this will be yours. Every offering of theirs, whether from every grain offering, or from every purification offering, or from every reparation offering which they bring to me, will be most holy for you and for your sons. You are to eat it as a most holy offering. Every male may eat it. It will be holy to you. And this is yours, the raised offering of their guilt, along with all the wave offerings of the Israelites. I have given them to you and to your sons and daughters with you as a perpetual ordinance. Everyone who is ceremonially clean in your household may eat of it. All the best of the olive oil and all the best of the wine and of the wheat, the first fruits of these things that they give to the Lord, I have given to you. And whatever first ripe fruit in their land they bring to the Lord will be yours. Everyone who is ceremonially clean in your household may eat of it. Everything devoted in Israel will be yours. The firstborn of every womb which they present to the Lord, whether human or animal, will be yours. Nevertheless, the firstborn sons you must redeem, and the firstborn males of unclean animals you must redeem. And those that must be redeemed, you are to redeem when they are a month old, according to your estimation, for 5 shekels of silver, according to the sanctuary shekel, which is 20 gerahs. But you must not redeem the firstborn of a cow, or a sheep, or a goat. They are holy. You must splash their blood on the altar, and burn their fat for an offering made by fire, for a pleasing aroma to the Lord. And their meat will be yours, just as the breast and the right hip of the raised offering is yours. All the raised offerings of the holy things that the Israelites offer to the Lord, I have given to you, and to your sons and daughters with you, as a perpetual ordinance. It is a covenant of salt forever before the Lord, for you and for your descendants with you. The Lord spoke to Aaron, you will have no inheritance in their land, nor will you have any portion of property among them. I am your portion and your inheritance among the Israelites. See, I have given the Levites all the tithes in Israel for an inheritance, for their service which they perform, the service of the tent of meeting. No longer may the Israelites approach the tent of meeting, or else they will bear their sin and die. But the Levites must perform the service of the tent of meeting, and they must bear their iniquity. It will be a perpetual ordinance throughout your generations, that among the Israelites the Levites have no inheritance. But I have given to the Levites for an inheritance the tithes of the Israelites that are offered to the Lord as a raised offering. That is why I said to them that among the Israelites they are to have no inheritance. The Lord spoke to Moses, you are to speak to the Levites, and you must tell them, when you receive from the Israelites the tithe that I have given you from them as your inheritance, then you are to offer up from it as a raised offering to the Lord 1/10 of the tithe, and your raised offering will be credited to you as though it were grain from the threshing floor, or as new wine from the winepress. Thus you are to offer up a raised offering to the Lord of all your tithes which you received from the Israelites. And you must give the Lord's raised offering from it to Aaron the priest. From all your gifts you must offer up every raised offering due to the Lord, from all the best of it, and the holiest part of it. Therefore you will say to them, when you offer up the best of it, then it will be credited to the Levites as the product of the threshing floor, and as the product of the winepress. And you may eat it in any place, you and your household, because it is your wages for your service in the tent of meeting. And you will bear no sin concerning it when you offer up the best of it. And you must not profane the holy things of the Israelites, or else you will die. Yeah, so this section that we just read immediately follows the rebellion of Korah, where Korah and his company assert that the whole congregation of the Lord is holy. So why are you in charge, Aaron and Moses? Yeah. But Korah's ambition was to seize power for himself, and in doing so, the company of Korah was judged by God and swallowed by the earth. Then immediately after that, you have the Israelites murmuring about Moses and Aaron again, saying, you have killed the Lord's people, and a plague breaking out amongst the middle of them, Aaron standing and interceding on their behalf between the living and the dead, and abating the plague. Then you have still more rebellious murmuring from the Israelites here, and God, seeking to resolve this murmuring, takes a staff, has each of the heads of the families of the tribes of Israel take a staff and bring it into the tent of meeting. And Aaron's staff buds, thus putting an end to, at least hopefully, putting an end to the question of who God chose. And then you have the duties of the Levites here reiterated again, the priest's portion, and them being commanded to give a tithe of the tithe to the Lord. On the next day, all the congregation of the children of Israel murmured against Moses and Aaron. Poor Moses, he no doubt hoped that all the trouble was over when the rebels were judged, but now he had to deal with those who were sympathetic to the divisive people and who felt sorry for them. Yeah. Interesting here how feelings of sympathy towards the rebels brought these people into sin. We need to be careful in our thinking. You have killed the people of the Lord. Their accusation against Moses was absurd. Moses certainly did not kill them. When the earth opens up and swallows more than 250 people, it is evidently the hand of God, not of Moses. And then God reacts to them. Get away from this congregation that I may consume them in a moment. God reacted the same way towards the sympathizers as he did towards Korah and his company. Evidently, these people deserve to be judged. And they fell on their faces. This humble, desperate reaction showed that they took the threat of judgment seriously. They understood that it was no small thing to sympathize with a divisive, contentious person. God takes it seriously, and so should we. Moses said, "Take a censer and put fire in it from the altar, put incense on it, and take it quickly to the congregation and make atonement for them." God had promised judgment in Numbers 16:45, that I may consume them in a moment. Therefore Moses told Aaron, as the high priest over God's people, to immediately offer incense to make atonement for the congregation. Yeah, and I think this demonstrates the role of the high priest well. That is, to make intercession but on behalf of man before God. And Aaron does this admirably. Then Aaron took it as Moses commanded and ran into the midst of the assembly. Moses and Aaron might have had an interest in letting God consume all those who sympathized with those who rebelled against their leadership. Instead, out of love, they tried to stop the plague. We have no reason to think that Korah or his group would have shown the same mercy to Moses. They probably would have passively said, "Well, God, go ahead and give them what they deserve. I know they had it coming to them." Korah and the complainers didn't have the same shepherd's heart for Israel that Moses and Aaron did. Yeah, and it should remind us of the heart of God. Even when we see judgment against people that deserve it, we should intercede, I think. Just, from the proverb, hold back those stumbling to destruction and on their way to death. Oh, hold them back type thing. God is not a God that delights in the punishment of the wicked, but rather that the wicked man should turn from his wicked way and live. And we should have that same heart towards people, like Aaron and Moses demonstrated here. Aaron ran into the midst of the congregation. His sense of urgency is characteristic of true intercession. So he put in the incense and made atonement for the people. A censer filled with burning incense was used to stop the plague. Incense is a picture of prayer in the Bible, because the sweet-smelling smoke of incense ascends to heaven as our prayers would. This was a dramatic picture of Aaron, as a high priest, interceding for God's people. And he stood between the dead and the living, so the plague was stopped. The plague stopped when Aaron prayed. Intercessors do the same thing today. They stand between the dead and the living, beseeching God's mercy, preserving and promoting life with their prayer. To stand between the dead and the living speaks of how serious the matter of prayer is. It is no casual pursuit, no fatalistic exercise in self-improvement. Prayer moves the hand of God and moves it to stop death and to give life. When was the last time we prayed as if life and death depended upon it? Those who died in the plague were 14,700. This is a great number, but not compared to the consuming of the whole nation. Even now, the generation of unbelief was perishing in the wilderness, so a new generation of faith and boldness could be raised up to take the promised land. More importantly, Aaron, the high priest's work here is a picture of our high priest, Jesus, and his work on our behalf. We were guilty sinners deserving judgment. We were rightly plagued. Our Savior was sent on his mission. He was unjustly accused and attacked. He prayed on our behalf. He ran to save us. He stood between death and life for us, and he is the only chance for salvation, being the dividing line between death and life. Aaron wisely put himself in the pathway of the plague. It came on, cutting down all before it, and there stood Aaron, the interposer, with arms outstretched and censer swinging towards the heaven, interposing himself between the darts of death and the people. If there be darts that must fly, he seemed to say, let them pierce me, or let the incense shield both me and the people. From Spurgeon. There's nothing that can save the soul of man except Jesus Christ standing between that soul and the judgment of God. Yeah. Which, if one were to look at things naturalistically, of a plague suddenly breaking out in the middle of the people, the last thing on anybody's mind would be to run into the middle of it and thereby catch it themselves. But Aaron and Moses, rightly realizing this as the judgment of God, prayed on behalf of the people. If Aaron the high priest, with his censer and incense, could disarm the wrath of an insulted, angry deity, so that a guilty people who deserved nothing but destruction should be spared, how much more effectual may we expect the great atonement to be, which was made by the Lord Jesus Christ, of whom Aaron was only the type. The sacrifices of living animals pointed out the death of Christ on the cross, the incense his intercession. Through his death, salvation is purchased for the world. By his intercession, the offending children of men are spared. From Clark. Then you have the murmuring of the Israelites. Get from them a rod from each father's house. A rod was a symbol of authority, because shepherds would use a rod to guide and correct the sheep. Write each man's name on his rod, and you shall write Aaron's name on the rod of Levi. In gathering rods and inscribing each with the name of a tribe, and on Levi's rod inscribing Aaron's name, God would declare which tribe possessed priestly authority by choosing one of the rods. This was the issue at hand in light of Korah's rebellion. Yeah. But I mean, it just seems so unnecessary at this point to say, oh yeah, Aaron's the guy. He's the priest man. He's the one who's going to serve as intercessor here. Because previous to this in Exodus and Leviticus, you had the establishment of the sons of Aaron being the high priestly family. That's what was done when they set out in ranks. But yeah, I guess we're very quick to forget or to rebel. Thus I will rid myself of the murmurings. This did not mean that after this the children of Israel would never complain again, but God, having demonstrated more than sufficient evidence to the murmurers, would no longer regard their murmuring. Indeed, he would then judge their murmuring. Murmurers, that is, complainers, are rarely satisfied by evidence or the resolution of one issue. Complainers are not issue-motivated, though they claim to be, and appear to be. They are heart-motivated. They murmur because they have complaining, discontent hearts. The complaining heart is demonstrated when people murmur about one issue after another, never being satisfied. Yeah. God, thus having demonstrated, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that Aaron is the one whom he chose, would then leave a murmurer no recourse in saying, oh, I thought you didn't choose him. And behold the rod of Aaron. When Moses checked on the rods the next day, Aaron's rod, and only Aaron's rod, had sprouted. It not only sprouted, it had put forth buds. It had not only put forth buds, it had produced blossoms. It had not only produced blossoms, it had yielded almonds. It had not only yielded almonds, it yielded ripe almonds. This was a place where a small miracle would have been convincing. After all, God could have merely made a little green sprout come forth from Aaron's rod alone, and that would have, or should have, been enough. But God gave, as in the words of Acts 1:3, many infallible proofs to demonstrate his approval of Aaron's leadership. God gives us more than enough evidence. Our problem is a lack of willingness to see what he has made clear. We are probably to understand that some parts were in bud, others in bloom, and others had fruited. Fruit from a godly leader may come in all different stages. There is nothing remarkable about a piece of wood with buds, blossoms, or fruit on it, but a piece of dead wood with all these things appearing in one night after sitting in a tent is remarkable. Miracles in the Bible are often of this sort, natural events in unnatural conditions, timing, and placement. Yeah, for as much problem as people have with supernatural explanations for the parting of the Red Sea, what do people do with this? I imagine they don't know about it, frankly. Behold the rod of Aaron, the house of Levi had sprouted. God's choice of Aaron's rod did not mean that Aaron was the most spiritual man in the nation. God's chosen leaders will have godly character according to the principle of 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1. But it wasn't a contest to determine the most spiritual man among them. And the Lord said to Moses, "Bring Aaron's rod back before the testimony to be kept as a sign against the rebels." The rod of Aaron was to be kept as a museum piece, to remind the children of Israel that God had chosen a priesthood, and nothing would change that. Aaron's priesthood would always be Aaron's priesthood. Aaron's rod was to be kept in the Ark of the Covenant, as another example of Israel's failure and rebellion. When God looked down from heaven into the ark, he saw emblems of Israel's sin. The tablets of law they broke. The manna they complained about, and Aaron's rod meant to answer their rebellion. The covering blood of sacrifice was applied to the lid, covering over these reminders of Israel's sin. So God saw the blood, covering their sin, and atonement was made. Yeah, so you had the law, God's law, rejected. You had the food, God's provision for the people, rejected. And you also had Aaron and Moses' leadership amongst the people, rejected. Three very serious things that Israel ended up perpetrating, committing, transgressing before God. And you have that in the Ark of the Covenant there. So it really is interesting how you have emblems of Israel's sin present in the Ark of the Covenant. And that was covered over by a sacrificial animal. Surely we die, we perish, we all perish. This shows that the people of Israel were clearly convicted of their sin. They now clearly knew that it was wrong to rebel against the leadership of Aaron. Shall we all utterly die? After seeing all that God did in the rebellion of Korah, destroying Korah and Dathan and Abiram, along with their 250 followers, among the leading men of Israel, the retrieval and hammering out of the censers for a covering on the altar, the plague destroying 14,700 of those who sympathized with Korah and his followers, and the miraculous confirmation of Aaron's priesthood, the people fear they are next to be judged, which was not an unreasonable fear. This kind of hysterical fear doesn't necessarily mean their hearts were changed. This will not be the last account of a complaining, murmuring Israel. This shows that dramatic events don't take away our complaining and rebelliousness. The heart has to be changed by God. You and your sons in your father's house. The priests, that is, Aaron, his sons, and their descendants, shall bear the iniquity related to the sanctuary and the priesthood. They were accountable to God. You shall bear the iniquity. This is the other side of Aaron's prerogative as the chosen priest of God, as demonstrated with the budding of the rod in Numbers 17. Moses had authority from God, but he also had accountability. God never gives authority without accountability. The two always go together. If God gives someone headship and expects others to submit to them in his order, God also has a special accountability for that person. The wave offering being for the priests. I have given to you and your sons and daughters with you as an ordinance forever. All of these belong to the priests, and it was vitally important to the children of Israel that the children of Israel fulfill their obligation to bring these things. God calls it a covenant of salt forever. Salt speaks of purity, of preservation, and of expense. So a covenant of salt is a pure covenant. Salt stays a pure chemical compound. A covenant of salt is an enduring covenant. And a covenant of salt is a valuable covenant. You shall have no inheritance in their land. While the priests had the right to receive much, he was also deprived of inheritance in the land. They had no permanent portion of land given to them, because God said, I am your portion and your inheritance. When God is our portion, he is our inheritance, our hope, who we trust for our future. We are satisfied in him. Since we are all a royal priesthood, we all have the Lord for our portion. I have given the children of Levi all the tithes in Israel. God commanded the tithes, a giving of 10% of one's income, to be given to the Levites for their support. The tithes belong to God. He says, I have given, so they are his to give. But he gives them to the Levites. When an Israelite was not giving their tithe, they were not robbing the Levite, though the money ended up with them. They were robbing God, because God received the tithe from the giver, and he gave it to the Levite. Some today think the tithe, since it went to support the Levites, who were in a sense government workers in ancient Israel, is covered by government taxes of today, and that free will giving mentioned in the Old Testament answers to the New Testament emphasis on giving. We can say that the New Testament nowhere specifically commands tithing, but it certainly does speak of it in a positive light if it is done with a right heart. It is also important to understand that tithing is not a principle of dependence on the Mosaic law. As Hebrews 7, 5-9 explains, tithing was practiced and honored by God before the law of Moses. Since the New Testament doesn't emphasize tithing, one might not be strict on it for Christians, though some Christians do argue against tithing on the basis of self-interest. But since giving is to be proportional, we should be giving some percentage, and 10% is a good benchmark and starting place. For some, to give 10% is nowhere near enough. For others, at their present time, 5% may be a massive step of faith. If our question is, how little can I give and still be pleasing to God, our heart isn't in the right place at all. We should have the attitude of some early Christians who essentially said, we're not under the tithe, we can give more. Giving and financial management is a spiritual issue, not just a financial one. A tenth of the tithe. The Levites themselves were not exempt from tithing. They were also to give a tenth, and due to the Lord, and the Lord gave it to the priests. It was important for the Levites to learn how to be givers also. Just because they were supported through the giving of God's people, it did not mean they didn't need to give. We all need to learn how to be givers because God is a giver, and we are being transformed into the image of Jesus. Of all the gifts you shall offer up, every heave offering due to the Lord. We are not told if the priests were to tithe from what they received. Presumably they did not, because what belonged to the priest was considered holy and not to be used by others outside the priestly families. This chapter clearly shows that the obligation of the Israelites to give was far more than just the tithe. the giving of 10%. The Israelites also had to give first fruits of all their produce and the firstborn of their flocks and herds, portions of each that went to the priests and or Levites. Firstborn and firstfruits were risky giving. Your land might not yield much more produce, and your cow or ewe might not give birth again. Yet the first still belonged to God and was given to the priests. Anywho, thank you so much for joining me today. Hope you have a great day. Bye.